Brilliant. So with that, like I was saying, grassroots pressure is really important, and with your help, we can engage Christian churches and other organizations to pressure the banks that are funding fossil fuels. So we're going to be hearing from three different organizations this evening, all of which you can get involved with and have sort of like really interesting campaigns and really impactful campaigns to get involved with. First of all, we'll hear from Rosie from the Just Money movement. And she's also going to talk a bit about the statement of concern and the background to that. Secondly, we'll hear from James from the Laudato Si movement. And then finally, we'll hear from Holly from Christian Climate Action, who'll be joining us partway through the session. And she's also going to talk a bit more about the shift in, or like Sheffield Cathedral and Greenbelt Festival, who both switched bank account after some grassroots pressure. So that'll be a really interesting thing to get a bit of insight from. So with that, thank you very much all again for joining, and I'll hand over to Rosie from Just Money Movement to talk more about our organization and what they're up to and how you can get involved. So thanks. I'll hand over to you, Rosie.
Thank you so much, Luke. And I think it's really lovely to have Luke hosting this webinar, like representing that wider movement across civil society that's been working on these issues for a long time, of which the kind of Christian element of that movement is the part that we are celebrating and talking about tonight. But I think it's really important that we recognise that we're part of a much wider movement, that we have allies across different parts of the communities that we're part of. And yeah, it's lovely to be with you this evening. As I was saying to Luke earlier, I've been working from home, working remotely all day, looking at my computer screen, and but it's really lovely to actually be amongst other campaigners and people that I recognise and folk that I don't know so well on the call. So it's really good to be with you. I thought I'd set the scene a little bit by saying a little bit about where the statement of concern came from. Um, as you'll no doubt be aware, and those of you who've been campaigning in this space for a long time, there's been a long tradition of Christian and church advocacy around banking on a wide range of ethical issues. But that seems to have been growing in momentum over the past year, particularly around climate campaigning and climate action. And a conversation happened earlier in the year between Churches Together in Britain and Ireland and Make My Money Matter, who've been doing a lot of campaigning around banking. Adam's on the call tonight, might be able to say a little bit more about that later. And Just Money Movement together saying, oh, how could we bring some of that action that's already happening in the churches together in a more public way? How can we resource churches to take action with their banking, to consider actions they can take, like switching, investor engagement, all the different ways in which we can put pressure on banks? How can we do that in a more coordinated way? And that began by CTBI hosting a webinar back in May, looking at money, churches, and the climate crisis, where we had an opportunity to bring church leaders together, campaigners together, to talk about some of the things that are already going on, some of the background to the campaigning, and to start to discern a way forward. And out of that grew this really rich collaboration of different organisations that were behind the co-authoring of the statement of concern. So that included CTBI, Just Money Movement, Make My Money Matter, Christian Climate Action, Laudato Si movement, and support from the World Council of Churches and from the Bank Better campaign at Tipping Point. So lots of names. Some of those names might be familiar to you, and those are lots of organisations on the call this evening. But I think what that did was bring together a lot of the energy that there is around putting pressure on banks, with a much wider movement of people in churches and congregations and denominations who are really passionate about seeing a fairer, greener banking sector and getting more involved. So hopefully you've read the statement of concern, which was made public the middle of last month, and was sent to the CEOs of the big five UK banks. We've started to receive some responses back from those banks as a result of that pressure, and happy to talk a bit more about that later. But I just wanted to say a little bit about how that statement of concern came about and why there's this kind of large group of organisations who are working together on this and trying to bring that agency and voice of the churches ecumenically in the UK into this work that's been going on for a long time. Um, So with that, yeah, that bit of background, I'll just share a little bit more about Just Money Movement's work in this space, and ways that you can continue to campaign and to be involved, and ways that we can equip you to do that. I'm just going to share a couple of slides, so just bear with me while I get those up for it. There we go. So for those of you who don't know Just Money Movement, we support Christians and churches across the UK to connect their faith and their finances for a fairer, greener world. You might have known us previously as ECCR, but we changed our name to the Just Money Movement a couple of years ago. We produce resources and training to help churches and Christians make more ethical choices with their own money. So through their banking, savings, pensions, and spending that better reflects the values in the world that we want to see, and to help people understand their connection to the wider financial system. And a particular focus for us in our campaigning for the last few years has been on how do we get a fairer, greener banking sector? What are the actions that we need to take? What's the advocacy that needs to happen? And we know that churches have long held ethical concerns around banking, but yeah, that there's this particular urgency around climate action and fossil fuel financing. We know that lots of churches want to take action as part of their Care for Creation, part of their net zero commitments, or as part of their eco church journey. So we want to resource churches to take practical action. And one of the ways in which we do that is through education. So being out and about at festivals, at conferences, and talking to people about uh, like the connections between banks and the climate crisis, and trying to build that education and help people to do that themselves within their own congregations through points in the year like Good Money Week or Season of Creation, and just getting those conversations started. So yeah, learning and education is a really big part of what we do, but then also giving people tangible actions that they can take, and campaigns that they can be part of. So we previously ran a campaign on trying to stop single-use plastics financing by the banks, and we had a big focus on HSBC last year, getting people to go along to their AGM, ask questions, and follow that up with more engagements and email campaigns. So lots of different tactics, and I think that's what's really beautiful about the different organisations that are represented here this evening, is that we need all of these different tactics as part of the movement. So whether that's taking action with your own finances or getting involved in lobbying banks and businesses, going along to AGMs, finding out how your denomination's investment policies are around banking and fossil fuel financing, just lots of different pressure points that we can use. So yeah, lots of ways you can get involved. And I just wanted to mention a couple of things before I pass on to James and others to talk about the work that they're doing. So one very practical resource that we produce and we revise every year for churches is a greener, fairer banking guide. We're really conscious that particularly for church treasurers and finance officers, can be quite challenging to work out where to switch to if you're wanting to switch away from one of the mainstream banks. So we look at 4 banks that we consider to be more ethical, which are CAF Bank, Reliance, Unity Trust, and the Cooperative. So you can download that guide for free from our website. I'll put a link in the chat later. And we'd love your feedback on it. So if you've used it, if you downloaded it, or if you want to share that with your church, we really want to make sure that that answers the questions that you have or that your treasurer has. And one of the things that we've introduced this year from feedback from people like yourselves is much more detail around climate and the kind of climate policies of those banks that we are comparing, so that you can see it as part of your climate action, whether the motivation to switch bank has come because of that or because dissatisfaction with being with one of the big high street banks, which I know is the case for lots of churches at the moment. So that's one really practical way that we can support you to take action. Really happy to talk to treasurers and finance officers individually about the steps that you might need to take. We are doing some green finance training for treasurers in the coming months as well. So if that's something that you'd like to be part of, then it'd be really great to have you along to that. Another way in to talking about banking, perhaps if your church is not quite there yet, it's not something that's yet on people's radar and people are not talking about it, is to take more of a theological discussion approach and think about our discipleship and our use of money, and then use that as a way into speaking about our financial decision making. So we've also got a small group resource that you can do with your congregation if that's something that you maybe need to take a step back and actually look at, how do we understand our use of money? What should our stewardship look like? And begin talking about more practical issues like banking and pensions and investments. And so that's another way that we can support you to take action. Um, and finally, an opportunity, particularly for individuals who would like to feel more connected to others who are campaigning in this space. We have a Just Money Champions network, which you can join, which links you up with other people in different congregations and communities. We see it as a kind of peer network where you can share what you're doing and get connected with others. And we run some what we call like deeper dive training throughout the year to get you connected and equipped to take action. So we've got a training on banking coming up in the new year. We'll also be looking at how you can get involved in AGM activism. So if you want to come along to HSBC's AGM with us this year, ask your questions, then you can get trained up to do that. So that's a kind of whistle-stop tour of how we can support and resource you in your campaigning. But I think what I'd also just want to leave by saying is that we really want this to continue to be a collaborative campaign. So I know some of you will be active in other networks and with other organisations, and I'm just really keen that as much as possible we collaborate on what we're doing around our banking advocacy, that we share the kind of asks that we're making and the kind of conversations that we're having with banks so that we can have a really powerful voice. So I think if anyone wants to be involved at that more strategic level, then do get in touch, because it'd be really good to have a shared voice amongst the churches and continue the work that's happened through the statement of concern, so that we keep that voice strong in the coming months. And I'll stop sharing now and hand over to James from Laudato Si Movements.
Thank you, Rosie. And thanks also to Luke for coordinating this webinar this evening. Great to see you all. So yeah, my name's James Buchanan. I work as the Climate Finance Campaign Manager for Laudato Si Movement, based near Oxford. Laudato Si Movement is a global Catholic organisation which works to inspire and mobilize the Catholic community to care for our common home and achieve climate and ecological justice in collaboration with all people of goodwill. It was previously known as the Global Catholic Climate Movement, and then about 3 years ago was renamed after Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment, with his permission, as Laudato Si Movement. So I also have some slides, which I'm going to just share my screen. Also, just to say, it's great to see a couple of our Laudato Si Movement supporters, our Laudato Si animators here this evening, and I'm going to mention in a minute what Laudato Si animators are. So just a moment. Okay, so I think probably for those of you who have heard Laudato Si Movement before, I think probably one of the ways in which you might have heard of our work has been as one of the organisations particularly involved in the global divestment movement. Laudato Si Movement has been campaigning on fossil fuel divestment for quite a number of years, and this was just last month. 27 faith institutions announced their divestment from fossil fuel companies, and that included several Catholic dioceses in France and Italy. There are a couple of Church of England dioceses that participated, Catholic religious orders from all over the world as well. So that's a campaign that we've been involved with for quite some time, with some of the other partners that you can see here at Operation Noah and others. And in the UK, well, all Scottish Catholic dioceses have now divested, and the same with the Catholic Bishops' Conference in Scotland. This is in England and Wales. In fact, there's been another diocese that has divested since this graphic was put together by Loud Sea Movement, and that's East Anglia recently has divested. So we're now up to the point where about 2/3 of Catholic dioceses are no longer investing in fossil fuel companies. And I guess when it comes to the topic of encouraging your diocese, because that's, that might be a place to start. Encouraging your diocese to consider switching its bank account, probably a first step for a number of those institutions would be to divest from fossil fuel companies. And so these are sort of two campaigns that we're working on alongside each other. And so if your diocese is still in the red zone, with the exception of East Anglia Diocese, which should be in the green, divestment is probably the first thing to encourage them to do. We were really delighted a couple of weeks ago that there were 8 Catholic religious orders in the UK that signed on to the statement of concern that Rosie and Luke have presented. It managed to get some coverage from in various news outlets, but including in the Catholic press. This article was Crux, which is a Catholic publication, and this is a quote from one of the signatories of the statement, Sister Susan Francois, who's from the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace. She said, "We believe that we have a fiduciary responsibility to the earth and present and future generations. We signed this statement because we agree with Pope Francis that we must transform the economy from one that kills into an economy of life." So, very hard hitting, but I think it really makes the point really clearly that how the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace see their fiduciary responsibility is not just about making financial returns, but it's also about, do we have a livable future? I wanted to share just some recent good news from France. I guess perhaps to give you some encouragement in terms of the impact of campaigning and the impact of campaigns on banks that they can have. Just last week, BNP Paribas Asset Management announced that it would no longer invest in new oil and gas company bonds. And this is really the main way in which fossil fuel companies now raise finances, by issuing bonds. And so this decision came about after the campaigning of various different groups. You can see on there's a screenshot here of the Reclaim Finance website. It's been one of the really key organizations based in France supporting this, but there were various others as well. And including Laudato Si movement, my predecessor in this role, Joseph, who is from France, worked with the Scouts and Guides in France, who lobbied BNP Paribas on their fossil fuel financing. And these are a couple of articles. The one at the top was from Radio France, the main sort of national French radio station, and the title of the article is "Are the Scouts becoming the new green influencers?" And the article below is around the Scouts and Guides France holding BNP to account because their fossil fuel support is incompatible with the preservation of a livable world. So I guess really just to show, this is one example of a particular organization. And in France, the Scouts and Guides are probably slightly more closely affiliated with the church, perhaps, than they are here. Again, the Scouts and Guides in France spoke out against BNP's fossil fuel financing, and just in the last few days, we've seen, lots of different organisations involved. But the real impact that challenging our banks on these issues can have, and we really hope that this decision from BNP Paribas, it needs to also be applied by their subsidiaries. So we can't completely celebrate everything yet. There's further to go for BNP as well. But we really hope that it will encourage other banks in Europe, including in the UK, to do the same. So just to share a little bit about some of the resources that we've got at Laudato Si movement, if you're interested in finding out more. On our Laudato Si movement website, we've got some pages specifically on banks financing of fossil fuels and campaigning around that, and also fossil fuel divestment. And this quote, I'm sure a number of you will recognize it well from the Bible: "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Um, Obviously, where are we? Where is our financial treasure going? Is it going to um, is it going to the sorts of is it being invested in the sort of companies that we would like to see thrive in the future, or is it going into the fossil fuel industry? Is it being used by banks to bankroll more fossil fuels, which ultimately are threatening the future of life on Earth? And on our webpage, we've got again, I'm sure some of you will be well familiar with this. This is a resource from bank.green, but it's sort of embedded on our website where you can kind of look up your own bank. And similarly, if you're aware what your which bank your local diocese uses or whatever, you can also look it up on this page. And then it will tell you, are they investing in the fossil fuel industry, in which case they're probably pointing towards the red, or if they're one of the better banks, it will be in the green zone. So this is a really useful, simple tool to be able to kind of see, how is my bank doing? Um, and yeah, and I guess in terms of the Catholic Church, the finances are managed at various different levels. I think in people's local churches, it will probably just be like the priest's bank account. So there probably won't be a huge amount of money there. But that might be a good place to start the conversation in terms of, because your priest could also have some influence in your diocese. You could also write to your bishop to ask, what's our diocese doing on these issues? And if you know any of the trustees of your diocese as well, those are also good people to contact. And then similarly, if you have good contacts with members of religious orders, because again, members of religious orders themselves, some of them have, it varies quite a lot between different religious orders, but some of them do have fairly sizable investments. And so again, it's a good place to sort of and therefore they can have an influence with some of these banks as well. If they were to say, we as an organization are moving away from your bank because of your fossil fuel financing. What's also really important, and I think others have said it already, and others will say it, is making that visible as well. So ensuring that if your diocese, or if you're a member of religious order and makes this decision, make sure that you share that publicly, because that has a much, much wider impact and can encourage and inspire others to do the same. So I'm going to stop there, and hopefully Holly has joined. I'm not sure if she has, but anyway, I'm going to hand back to Luke at this point.
Brilliant. Thanks, James. Yeah, I really, really appreciate that presentation. I think it's really heartening to see, people working really hard within different Christian denominations, but really pulling in the same direction, and putting pressure on, like you said, the big scale stuff, the diocese, and then also smaller churches and others that are maybe a bit more movable. And I think, yeah, just to reiterate what you said about visibility, I think that is really important. When, if churches are switching, it's really important that we know about it, and hopefully they're willing to give quotes and publicize it. And even if we're talking about small parish churches, if we get dozens of those or hundreds of those to be moving, that can really make a new story, and it can really start to worry some of the big banks. So definitely worth pushing at like all different kind of levels. And really that's the best way in many ways to build up some momentum. So thanks very much for that. And another thing actually that Rosie posted in the chat that I had actually forgotten about, which is that the statement of concern remains open for organizations to sign. So we decided, we obviously wanted as many signatories as possible before we sort of launched it, but we decided that actually it's a really good idea to keep it open. So if there's if there's Christian organizations that see that statement of concern and think, I want my name to be on there, I don't want to be left out of the conversation here, I want to, show our support for this statement, then they can still sign on to it. So I'd encourage you to speak to people in any organizations you're part of, or let people know about it and encourage them to still sign it. And that'd be really great. So I'm hoping we will still be joined by Holly from Christian Climate Action. She's going to talk a bit about Christian Climate Action themselves, and also some of the wins they've had on like Sheffield Cathedral and Greenbelt Festival. I don't know. I'm wondering if Karen would be able to say a little bit. Oh, that's fine. That's fine. So, well, let's see if Holly arrives. She let us know that she was going to be late to the meeting, but ideally would have been here by now. But I think in the meantime, I'm also going to see if Adam wants to say a little bit about Make My Money Matter. They played like a really crucial role in pulling together this statement of concern, and do lots of interesting work. So I wonder if you want to just speak about that for a few minutes. That'd be really helpful context, I think, for everyone here.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm Adam from Make My Money Matter, which is a campaign founded by Richard Curtis, the film director, and we mainly focus on the public side of things. So we do less kind of grassroots organizing, but for us, it's really about getting the word out there. We've done some videos with celebrities. You might have seen Olivia Colman talk about fossil fuels and pensions about a year ago. So we do things like that. Which are quite good fun, and we try and be as high profile as possible. And I think for us, it's been fantastic to be part of this, simply because now we're seeing so many institutions kind of all come together and all work on the same thing, and and inch by inch, it's growing, it's getting bigger. As Luke kind of mentioned at the start, the statement is the largest group of organizations that have come together to call on our banks, the big five high street banks, to stop financing fossil fuels. And it's so important, because these banks see themselves as British high street banks. They have a strong sense of identity. They have a strong place in our society. So when universities and churches and charities all start calling them out, it does cause them problems, and it can be really powerful, especially when that becomes public. And if you can get your diocese or even your local church to move, it's such a huge benefit to the movement as a whole, because the banks will see that, they'll notice that, and we know it's a strategy that works. It worked in during the Boycott South Africa campaign, where way back in sort of 60s and 80s, and it worked, and we're seeing a very similar thing starting to happen now. So yeah, the next couple of years look very exciting. On our side of things, for us, you can follow us on social media, so Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Blue Sky now, the new one. So we'll be there, and you can join our mailing list on our website at Make My Money Matter. And also we have a kind of very basic switch page for individuals. It's not quite as kind of detailed as bank.green or just money, but it does have a very quick and simple table that you can see who the bad banks are. There's a drop down box to find out where you can move to. And we also have a guide for kind of organizations in general on the same page. So I'll put that in the chat in a moment. So any organization that you're a part of that you can talk to about their bank account is really important, and a huge bonus.
Brilliant, thanks, Adam. And yeah, definitely encourage people to check out Make My Money's Matters website. And you might have seen their videos have been really powerful, I think. So definitely check those out as well if you haven't seen them already. So yeah, James's suggestion, we can definitely hear a little bit more about Laudato Si animators. I think it'd be really interesting to hear kind of the work that people can do across the country, like regionally and in different areas and stuff, and all the great work that's been happening. So I don't know if any of those folks want to share what they've been up to.
Yeah, I don't know. John, do you want to say something?
Yeah, this is. Can you hear me all right? This is very interesting. I think some of the animators have done quite a lot of work on this, but others haven't. So I think we've certainly written to bishops to find out what banking arrangements they have, and whether we certainly did a lot about trying to get people to divest. And I'm sorry to see that some of those dioceses still haven't done it. So we have managed to get some of them to do it. So that's very encouraging. I think a role we've actually taken is a lot of contacting people and writing to them, and using the letter route, really. You've got a picture there of us having our gathering at Salford, and James is there on the right. We've got Bishop John Arnold, who is our bishop for the environment, and he spoke to us briefly, and he said the bishops are coming round. I think the problem with that is that it's great having him. He does a wonderful job, but actually all the bishops have got to take this on board. It's not right that just one has to carry the can all the time. As a result of that encounter, we've been writing to bishops and environmental leads about actually having a Laudato Si centre in every diocese. And we've had some very positive responses to that, because it wouldn't cost a lot of money to set up something like that. So that's probably enough for me. I mean, we have got people in nearly every diocese now, so that's really encouraging.
I'm sorry, James. I don't know if you want to add any more on this or.
No, that's it. So thank you, John, and thanks to Anitis Columba and Janet are both on the call as well. So yeah, thanks to you both for joining us too.
Oh, brilliant. Really interesting to hear. Columba, is that?
Just quickly, I have written, well, both to the bishop, but to the finance trustee, head of trustees. He's the finance man as well for Hallam Diocese, and actually quite positive about the idea, but needs more kind of, I think, grassroots pressure from the parishes, really. And just says it would be such a huge pain doing it. And also that not every, I mean, I've talked about the co-op, but that the like CAF and Reliance, the other ones, they don't provide all the services that a diocese might need. So those are kind of sticking points that are, certainly not against the idea, but just the fact that it would be kind of difficult in practical terms, which I know as a religious institution you shouldn't be thinking about, but there you go. In practical terms, it is something, if it could just be kind of made easier. I've also been in touch with the co-op bank, the Save Our Bank campaign, because, the co-op had quite a bit of trouble in the, it's holding on to itself really and not being funded, being bought out by hedge funders and that sort of a thing. And it is now joining with the Coventry Building Society, and they're very interested in the idea, the Save Our Bank campaign, very interested in the idea that there is this pressure from faith groups to switch banks, for instance, to the co-op. So that's all. I just wanted to put that into.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much. And I think that points to a couple of really important things there. I think one is we definitely need that grassroots pressure, right? Often there are people in these positions of like power and influence, and even if they have goodwill and they're good people, sometimes it does just take a bit of pressure on them to give the justification, to give the need for them to do what, does take time. So that kind of grassroots pressure, I think, is really important. And also, I mean, it's also very valid. It's not super straightforward always, and there are quite limited options, but I think there are things we can do. I think the main one is like finding really good case studies, right, of Christian organizations or other kinds of organizations of a similar size that have switched, and really being able to share that story and how it was probably not super straightforward, but hopefully less painful than people would fear. So yeah, so I mean, just maybe a good segue into Holly coming in. Thank you very much, Holly, for joining. Holly's from Christian Climate Action, and just going to talk a bit about what Christian Climate Action does, how you can get involved, and specifically some of the wins they've had through grassroots pressure, including Sheffield Cathedral and Greenbelt Festival. So yeah, thanks very much for joining, Holly, and I'll just hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Really apologies for being late. I thought the call that I was on previously would close a lot quicker than that. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone. It's a real pleasure to speak to you all. As Luke said, I'm one of the admin and coordination team from Christian Climate Action. So I'll start off by saying a little bit about what Christian Climate Action is. So at our core, we are a community of Christians that support each other in taking meaningful action in the climate emergency. So we've got a number, basically, we're not a specific denomination, so all different denominations of Christians are involved, and the age range of people involved varies a lot. So yeah, we've got young adults all the way up to individuals who are in their 80s. So very kind of wide age range there. And yeah, we support each other to take action in different ways, really. So one of the things that we do is we pray together. So at 9 a.m. every morning, we have a online prayer slot together. So everything we do is very much kind of underlaid by prayer. And we plan campaigns together. So anyone in CCA, Christian Climate Action, who wants to get involved can plan a campaign as long as it kind of abides by the CCA principles. But when we talk about a campaign, there's different things that people do, really. So some people decide that they want to hold vigils, so planning vigils. And I actually can share, yeah, I can share my share some images actually. Can everyone see that? Yeah. Wonderful. So yeah, this is an example of one of the vigils that was held by some individuals in Cardiff. And this was one that I believe was held at Bristol University. So vigils is some of the things that we do. We also plan climate pilgrimages, and we hold to kind of raise awareness and things like that, or we plan actions. So this is a very kind of colourful, what you can see there is a very colourful action that we did about encouraging the Church of England to rewild its land. And here's another one, which is protesting against the Rosebank project, which we did in collaboration with some different groups as well. But yeah, we try to do actions which are proportional to the climate crisis. So we really try to kind of put our heads together and think about how to do something which is not just gonna, not just about kind of doing our bit, but actually really kind of have the focus on what's going to be the thing that can actually stop this climate emergency. And yeah, we've got Christians all across the UK, 16 local groups that we've got, which is really nice. So this is a picture of the East London and Essex group. But what's really nice is that it's not only about kind of supporting each other to do climate campaigns across CCA, where we've got kind of WhatsApp groups or online workshops or face-to-face kind of actions, that actually we do local groups so that you kind of feel really supported by people who kind of live in the immediate vicinity as well. So yeah, generally CCA does campaigning on a number of different issues. So this one was Rosebank, as I said, and we also, one of our other campaigns is trying to stop insuring fossil fuel projects. But one of the really key ones that we do is the ethical banking campaign. So yeah, and now is actually a really good time to get involved in the ethical banking campaign. We've just published a new action pack for the ethical banking campaign. And at the moment, we've got 3 main targets. They are Christian charities. So quite a lot of the big Christian charities bank with Barclays, which is the biggest funder of fossil fuels in Europe. But we're also targeting Christian cathedrals and dioceses. And just at the moment, that main target is Church of England, cathedrals and dioceses. But that's just where we've kind of started our focus. There's no kind of particular reason for that. And yes, what we're urging the charities, cathedrals and dioceses to do is to move away from one of the big high street banks. So for example, Barclays and HSBC, and for them to be moving their money to a bank that does not fund fossil fuels. And yes, one of the things that I'd really kind of want to make clear, I guess, when we think about kind of whether you would like to get involved in the ethical banking campaigns, is that this isn't a new thing. One of the exciting things about it is that there's already really great good news stories to be able to kind of celebrate. And so it won't be that kind of this is something that you're coming to afresh. This is something where I guess kind of the ball is already rolling. And so we're actually at a really exciting part of the campaign where it's kind of picking up speed at the moment in really quite an exciting way. So one of the good news stories is that Christian Aid has switched from Barclays Bank. So they dropped Barclays Bank. And it's really exciting to see actually just kind of the types of things that are causing these organizations to switch banks. Because if we just use Christian Aid as an example, so what we did with Christian Aid is kind of initially we emailed them and then we encouraged them to review their banking. So the board were meeting to review this. And at the time where they were meeting to review it, we held a vigil, which you can see here in this picture, outside. And Judith, who's on the call, is here. Outside their offices, and yeah, basically held some time of silence, some time where we did Peze, and some time where we did yeah, just kind of singing and things like that. And we actually invited their staff to come and join us as well. So it was this vigil, and then we actually kind of went to one of their board meetings and spoke to their board. And that was kind of all it took really for them to switch banks. And it is a big process. So actually kind of having that opportunity to, it's a big process switching banks. So having that opportunity to kind of pray with them and pray for the staff and kind of almost be like, we're alongside you in this, was a really important part of that process. But that was, yeah, and we got, there was some good press off the back of that as well. So it was not only, I guess the benefit of that was not only kind of the immediate switch for that charity, but then also kind of that then was able to create stories where more people heard about the issue of ethical banking, and also then I guess encouraged other organizations to do the same. Another story is Greenbelt Festival. So I don't know if people in this call are familiar with Greenbelt Festival, but it's one of the big Christian festivals. Faith, creativity, and justice, I think, are its kind of three streams. And again, this happened, they moved from Barclays to Co-op. And again, this happened by us holding a vigil at the festival site itself, and also sending them emails as well. So yeah, that was, and Greenbelt Festival are now, yeah, that not only did they kind of make that switch, but they're also, we were hoping to have them on the call today because they do often kind of do workshops where they talk and kind of encourage other people to make the switch as well. But they weren't able to just because of the timing, sadly. But yeah, that's a really positive switch. They're also now kind of doing workshops and speaking to people why that's an important thing to do. Sheffield Cathedral as well, they've switched from Barclays to the Co-op. I think it's the Co-op and another ethical bank as well that they've switched to. And this was triggered by two things. So first of all, we held a very small prayer vigil outside for half an hour on one Sunday. There was two of us for most of it, and then another person joined for a little bit of it. So it just shows how these things don't need to be big. And then they also had a Christmas tree competition where we entered a Christmas tree with Green Christian, where it was a Barclays Christmas tree that they then kind of had in the cathedral throughout the Christmas tree competition. So a bit of kind of creative campaigning with regards to that. And yeah, and also this was a vigil that we held outside of Oxfam office, who's also dropping Barclays. And I think that's it. That is all from me now. If anyone has any questions or anything, hopefully you've been able to see how exciting some of these things can be. but how easily accessible they are as well. Thanks. I'll stop.
Brilliant. Thanks, Holly. And a really nice reminder as well that campaigning can be all sorts of things. It can be letter writing, it can be creative things, it can be putting up Christmas trees. And it's good to see that, like, how big of a diversity of approaches it can take, and how fun it can be as well sometimes. So we've had already a couple of questions in the chat. So maybe we'll come to those first and then see if anyone else in the room has questions. So first of all, there's a question from, I actually don't know who's best to answer this, but there's a question from John about whether we have any spokespeople in a general synod of the Church of England. Does anyone here know about that?
Rosie, I'm thinking you're maybe the best person to talk about Church of England, if not the General Synod.
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that. It's a really good question, and perhaps something we need to do a bit of mapping of where our supportive contacts are, and where we have like deanery reps, where we have synod reps amongst our different organisations. So I don't have an answer, but that has sparked an idea about where we might need to sort of think a bit about where we can strategically push things up through the church structures.
Good. Yeah, so brilliant. Thanks very much for that question. Very, very helpful. Next question. Julie has asked about which banks can support the banking facilities dioceses need. I guess there are Catholic dioceses, there are Church of England dioceses, but I think maybe Holly might have a bit of an answer on this.
Yeah, this is a really good question. And I think this kind of highlights some of the complexities of this campaign. When it was the divestment campaign, it was very much kind of, it's almost kind of quite a black and white campaign where it was like either you had investments in it or you didn't. But with the banking campaign, there's kind of different answers for different targets in a way, even though it isn't kind of targets in the kind of normal sense, because obviously we're working alongside these organizations as well. And each organization will be different. So with the diocese, I think I had it's a bit of a grey area. I had a meeting with quite a lot of the diocese and my mother tree, and my mother tree is an organization which basically kind of facilitates quite a lot of switching and also kind of gives advice on these things. And they were quite confident that they would be able to find kind of a banking, I guess kind of a combination of banks or which would be able to provide the banking facilities that different dioceses need. We've actually kind of switched our campaign a little bit in CCA in the fact that we're either asking organizations to switch fully, or we're asking them if they say that they really can't do that and it's seen as a really sticking barrier, we're actually going to be asking them now to drain their bank account so that they're only keeping in that bank the bare minimum money for their transactions and day-to-day things that they need. And so that's kind of for organizations where that's kind of a real barrier, really. That's the kind of alternative that we're going to be asking them to do. But I think different groups and different organizations there isn't kind of a one size fits all, sadly. So it is a bit kind of sometimes about thinking a bit creatively.
Thanks, Holly. And yeah, I mean, just to give another example from another sector, there's one of the Royal Colleges, and what one of them is doing, I think it's the Royal College of Pathologists, but don't quote me on that, I could be wrong. And they're saying that they're going to move 95% of the funds in their bank account away from HSBC to Co-op, and then just keep the other 5% for some other kind of like more international transactions and stuff they need to do. And we're definitely seeing that, I think, as a victory. It still makes a really clear statement that they want to move away. And I guess the other thing to say is what we're hoping is that this pushes the big five banks to be much better. And so there's already quite a big difference. So Barclays and HSBC are definitely much worse. NatWest and Lloyds not as bad, but we need to see them to get better. So also hopefully at some point we will have some bigger banks that are nearly as ethical as the Co-op, for example. So that's also part of the approach. Rosie, have you got something to add to this?
I just wanted to say a couple of things. I think one thing we can do collectively as a movement is to speak to the ethical providers and advocate for the needs of churches and organisations. that's something we've been trying to do. We've been meeting regularly with CAF Bank and talking to them about the kind of issues that churches face in switching. I think the more that we can get that into the minds of the ethical banking sector, that there's this big movement of churches and organisations that want to switch and understand what some of the issues might be, then they can build into their planning and their strategy to kind of absorb that and make sure that their services are fitting the needs of, and it's not just churches, it's the wider charity sector. So I think that's quite a technical thing to do, but I think the ways that individuals can help us with that is sharing what some of those concerns and barriers are so that we can advocate. And then I think there is power in investor engagement still for those much larger organizations as alongside the switching where they have investments to be able to still keep those conversations alive. And I know that that's a different tactic, and I think can still be really effective. We desperately need the wider banking sector to change as well as championing the greener banks. So I think there's still that element for us that we will still keep up some of that pressure through the Church Investors Group. And then thirdly, I think I'm trying to think what the final thing I was going to say is going to come back to me. I think, yeah, I would really like to see us advocating for like individual switching as well. I know we've not talked about that. We've been talking about church switching, but that's part of the wider movement is where a congregation might be struggling to switch or that's taking a much longer time. It's going to be like 6 months before they can make the switch. What they can do is be talking to their individual congregation about their own banking and their switching because there's power within that movement as well. So I think let's not see those two things as separate, but those are collectively pressure that we can put, and ways of championing greener banks and fossil fuel free banks is getting individuals to switch alongside organisations.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rosie. I think we're actually nearly out of time. It's been a super interesting discussion. And there's maybe time for one more question if anyone has one. Feel free to also put your hand up if you have one. Yeah, John, go for it.
I put in the chat, one other thing I've come across quite a lot is this idea that bishops and trustees can influence the people they're banking with. I think it's a complete myth and it's got to be scotched. I don't think they have any influence at all, and it's actually used as an excuse by trustees for not changing because they say, oh, we'll keep the money with them, we can influence them. I don't believe it's true. I'd like some evidence of it actually ever happening.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing that. I think, speaking from a tipping point perspective, I think that has become our view. I think clearly, yeah, there are people and organizations who are like attempting to engage, but certainly from a tipping point perspective, we felt like, that time is sort of coming to an end, and what has the biggest impact often is people taking that really decisive step of switching away. So, yeah, from a tipping point perspective, at least that is what we've been pushing for. But it's not always easy to convince everyone else that's that is the situation. Adam?
Yeah, just to kind of add to that, broadly we agree, but obviously there's the problem of some of them actually don't have the option to move. But we found that sort of the only way banks tend to listen, or generally tend to listen now at the point we're at, is if the shadow of switching kind of remains and they're saying we're looking at other options, when we find one we might move, that kind of thing. That kind of engagement can be really powerful. So the chatter does work and it does create some level of pressure, but you're right, that kind of the crucial is them losing business is the crucial point.
Thanks very much. James?
I want to let Rosie go next, so I'll go after Rosie.
Yeah, go for it,
I was
Rosie.
just going to say that there's two tools that we haven't mentioned, which is like the banking regulation. So banks being forced to behave differently. That's something that we can put our efforts behind. And also there's litigation coming in. So there are groups that are starting to think about how do we take banks and businesses to court for their climate actions or their lack of climate action. So I just say, yes, switching is really important, but there are all these other tools as well that we can use, which might help shift some of those much bigger players in the sector that need to shift. Just throw that into the mix at the end.
Yeah, thank you very much. James?
Yeah. So yeah, I think I'm inclined to agree with you as well, John. I mean, I know that among Catholic groups, you'll see some sort of Catholic religious orders, for example, that are engaging with the banks as shareholders. So to give an example, the Jesuits are doing that at the moment. And I think in a way, perhaps similar to the divestment movement, there were a lot of faith institutions that were reluctant to divest initially because they wanted to kind of almost give the oil and gas companies a chance to change, even if, in the case of the oil and gas industry, it didn't happen. It still hasn't happened. And I think similarly with the banks, there's only so long you can allow them, So if there are groups that are sort of pursuing that sort of shareholder engagement strategy, then absolutely, as Luke said, the threat of moving your money kind of needs to be there as well. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks both very much. And yeah, I mean, there's definitely a bit much wider discussion there about sort of like different levers and which are the most effective. But I think hopefully we've given everyone a really clear idea of like some of the main things that it's important to be doing and some of the ways that we can put pressure on the banks that are funding the climate crisis. So I think we'll have to draw it to a close there. I'm just going to drop a couple of links in the chat. You can absolutely reach out directly to like some of the organizations who've been on this call here, but you can also fill in this Airtable form that I put in the chat. And if you fill that out and just pick which organizations you want to hear from, and that also includes a couple that weren't here tonight, so the World Council of Churches and also the Environmental Issues Network. So you can also hear from them if you go via the form. I also put a link into the WhatsApp community of Bank Better, which is goes much wider than kind of Christian organizations. It's like I said, it's a campaign or a network of campaigns kind of coordinated by Tipping Point. It's aiming to put pressure on, like I said, the banks funding the climate crisis in a whole host of different sectors, everything from faith groups to universities to medical organizations, charities, all sorts of things. And we have a sort of distributed network model with lots of campaigns going on in lots of different organizations. And so if you feel free to also join that WhatsApp community to sort of share experiences, hear what other people and groups have been up to, and yeah, get involved there. And I think, as always, it's really inspiring to hear stories from other areas, other campaigners, and see some of the wins that we've already had, but also talk about all the work that we still need to do. So yeah, with that, just a final thank you, especially to our speakers, Rosie, James, and Holly. Thanks very much for your insights and for your enthusiasm and energy. And thanks to everyone who's joined. We will be sharing the recording, I guess, by all the same channels that we publicize the webinar. So yeah, keep an eye out for it there if you want to then share it on to everyone else. But yeah, thank you all very much. I don't know if people just want to end by unmuting and saying, goodbye and thanks. It'd be a nice way to end. So I appreciate all your time.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody, for everything you do.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye.
Thanks
Yeah.
very much. Good night.